testifying in favor of HB 1177. So I always like to look at the who, what, when, where of the bill, so just wanted to go over some of that first. Who to whom does this bill apply? It's all those who are not prohibited by state law or federal law from possessing a firearm. So there's this whole list of people who are prohibited, which includes people convicted in any court of a crime punishable by imprisonment for more than a year, illegal alien, subject to court order for family violence, convicted misdemeanor crimes of domestic violence, adjudicated as mental defective or been committed to any mental institution. So that's part of the list to whom this does not apply. It's to lawful gun owners who already legally possess that but not prohibited by any state or federal law. And then the what and the where. So I want to just go over the penal code. So the question might be, well, this is only for handguns, it doesn't apply to long guns, so why? Well, that's because when you go to the penal code, there's actually not a general ban on carrying your long gun. So those are already, that's already been taken care of. People aren't affected by a law banning them carrying those long guns and taking them when they evacuate in a disaster zone. They're able to do that without breaking the law, but we still need to deal with it for the handguns for sure. So Penal Code 4602 says that you're prohibited from carrying that handgun except when you're on your property under your control. Same thing for your car or your boat, or car or boat under your control. So then what happens if you're trying to evacuate and you're like, well, my car can't take these roads, maybe my friend's truck can. Well, you're getting your friend's truck and all of a sudden you're breaking the law, or you leave your gun in your car, which is a very unsafe situation, especially if there are looters around, etc. So I think the whole point of the bill is really it guards against unsafe situations. So that's why I encourage you to pass it. The when, I think Representative Phelan already addressed disaster zones, and I think that's pretty clear. Just for a big picture view for comparison, the majority of states actually already allow lawful gun owners to carry in public without a license for handguns. So just for comparison, this is actually much smaller than what most states already allow. Obviously, allowing that would be my preference. That's a good way of solving the problem, because when you whittle away, you inevitably miss things, like we miss disasters or probably other areas that we've missed. But absolutely, I think it makes sense. It guards against unsafe situations, and helps with protection. So for all those reasons, I would really encourage you to pass this bill.
Ms. Malone, I appreciate your testimony. Are there any questions? Hearing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair calls Ms. Alice Tripp. Ms. Tripp, you're also first to testify. I'll ask you to say your name, just what organization you represent,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Phelan. My name's Alice Tripp. I'm the lobbyist for Texas State Rifle Association. We support this bill, and I'm also testifying for myself. In 2011, if you remember, on Labor Day, there was in 3 locations, due to the high winds that went with the northern fires that started that burned 1,700 homes. People left that weekend to go to the lake, and when they came home, they had nothing. And they were shut out of their homes for most of that time. The ones that got in and then got back out found that there had been looters. And what little they had left, like the compressor on their air conditioning or their copper wire, were gone. This bill would help take care of some of that protection that was needed in a terrible emergency time. There is no requirement for, or there's no penalty in law for a licensee who's lost their license to show it to law enforcement. You're supposed to if you've got your firearm on you, but there's no penalty. For one thing, it's tied to your driver's license. Back in '95, when we didn't have computers, that wasn't easy to verify, but that is now. But if you don't have a handgun license, you're limited, you're very limited to your own vehicle going directly to and from, or your own boat or whatever, as Rachel was saying. but to be able to have access to that firearm, to not leave it behind, to not worry about grandpa's rifle over the fireplace being stolen by looters, to be able to do all of that stuff and get out as quickly as you can. I live in Bastrop County. I helped evacuate 18 horses. And a friend of mine who was in her 80s, I lobbied my way through the roadblocks. And, you know, it was a very bad circumstance. So while it could be a hurricane here or a flood there, it could just as easily be a disaster such as a fire. And when you've got to leave a place quickly, sometimes in the middle of the night, you want to be able to grab everything you can of value and do so in return. I live a mile off a gravel road. I'm over an hour from law enforcement. I like to be able to go home and have some protection on me. So I think this bill does not a large amount, but it's important because licensees are the ones that actually use the penal code as an owner's manual. They actually they believe it, they study it, they follow it. Criminals should be so lucky. It's those that have a handgun license, that if it says you can't, they don't. If you can be stopped by a sign, you're not a criminal. So please think about this, and it's a tiny little loophole, but it needs to be fixed. Thank you.
Members, do you have any questions? Steve Wallen? If you would state your name, if you're for or against or on the bill, and represent.
Members of the committee, I'm Steve Bullock. I'm the General Counsel of the Texas Hospital Association. And I'm here today testifying on behalf of THA and its more than 470 hospital members against House Bill 1177. Our concern with the bill is really just with a very specific part of the bill that is in the place where the bill amends or adds a new subsection L to Penal Code 46.15. What that section does is it addresses the circumstances when a person can carry a firearm into an emergency shelter during a declared state of disaster. Our concern with that section is it would permit, by referencing 46.035B4, which is the penal code section that would prohibit a license holder from carrying a firearm into a hospital generally, would permit essentially set aside the existing statutory scheme and allow a person to carry a handgun into a hospital if the license holder was in an area that was declared a disaster. The hospital was functioning as a shelter, and as Representative Phelan mentioned, the owner or possessor or operator of the premises granted authorization to bring that gun into the premises. Our concern is that in the chaos of a disaster, there's just too much opportunity for confusion or misunderstanding about whether that authorization to carry a firearm on hospital premises was in place and was granted. And we think that this bill inappropriately vests the authority in individuals to essentially set aside existing laws as it relates to possession of a firearm in a hospital. The existing statute provides clarity on that issue, and we think should remain the governing law even in the circumstances of a disaster. Hospitals typically don't serve as emergency shelters. They aren't equipped or not equipped to provide that shelter to individuals not requiring medical care. They are buildings with tight corridors. There aren't a lot of open spaces. Additional staffing and resources are required to allow people into the hospital who aren't patients to be clothed save them, and say occupied during a storm. Hospitals during a disaster are in disaster response mode. They are required by federal law to have disaster plans, and when a disaster strikes, they spring into action and execute on those plans. Those plans dictate the amount of supplies, medication, everything else that, water, everything that they need to have on hand during disaster times. They don't take into account resources that would be needed to stand up an emergency shelter. And so, in the middle of all this chaos of the disaster, the hospital focuses on executing on its disaster plan, saving lives, and shouldn't be distracted by having people with firearms on the.
How's that a distraction?
Extremely unusual situation for our hospital in general. Our concern simply is that this sets a bad precedent by allowing a hospital to suspend their handgun prohibition on license holders. Hospitals are places of healing, they're places of comfort. In disasters, they're places where literally lives are being saved. They're trying to stand up their disaster response operations. It's an environment where tough, heart-wrenching decisions are made really on a day-to-day basis, but that becomes even more critical, and tensions escalate even more during disaster situations. So we are against including hospitals in the bill as it relates to allowing a person to carry a firearm into a location that is serving as an emergency shelter. We would respectfully request that any reference to section 46.035B4 be removed from the bill. I would be glad to answer any questions.
Representative Null.
Thank you. We're gonna create an undue burden for hospitals and other places of shelters to have to understand whether or not someone is allowed to have a gun during a disaster situation when they're trying to tend to people that have been injured in a disaster.
I completely agree. I mean, that certainly isn't the focus during a disaster situation. They're executing on the disaster plan. They're trying to save lives, and sort of ferreting out and vetting who has the legal authority to possess a gun, and then sort of taking the next step further to make a decision about whether to authorize that person. I think that to carry that gun onto the premises would be an undue burden on hospitals and bad policy.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sarah Micah.
Tara Micah's the NRA lobbyist.
If you would state your name, on or against the bill, and you're here for yourself or the witness.
Thank you, Representative Lang. Tara Mitchell with the National Rifle Association. We appreciate Representative Phelan, Chairman Phelan, bringing this bill, House Bill 1177. The NRA is in strong support of it, and we appreciate Chairman Navarez for setting the bill for a hearing. In response to the testimony just given by the representative from the Texas Hospital Association, the bill's provisions as far as lifting the prohibition on locations where firearms can't be, the prohibition is only lifted in places that are serving as emergency shelters, and I believe the representative from THA said that hospitals don't serve as emergency shelters. So I'm a little bit confused as to why they spoke in opposition to the bill. Additionally, one of the points in House Bill 1177 is that the owner or controller of the premises that used to be a prohibited location, which would no longer be if it were a shelter, that owner or controller of the premises continues to have authority as to whether any firearms are allowed on the premises. They can also elect to allow firearms on the premises, and the bill does not restrict them in any way from imposing whatever rules or regulations they feel are appropriate to have firearms on that particular premises that's serving as an emergency shelter. So I just wanted to address that. I think the people that testified before me did a great job covering the points of the bill. I think Chairman Phelan did a great job laying it out. I'd just like to emphasize that the bill only applies to a very narrow set of circumstances and people. It would only apply to somebody who's evacuating during a declared state or local disaster. It would only apply to somebody who either hadn't been issued a license to carry because they don't carry on their person outside the home or their personal vehicle, or it would only apply to somebody who had lost their license to carry in the chaos of a storm environment. Florida's had this law on their books since 2015, and I think I counted 8 named storms that state has been through since their act took effect, and there are no reports of problems with implementation of similar legislation in a state of with quite a large population that's in my personal story, I live in Steiner Ranch. In 2011, we had fires same weekend, same Labor Day weekend as Bastrop. Fortunately, we were all able to evacuate Steiner by our personal vehicle, so we wouldn't have had to worry about breaking the law if we had handguns in our vehicles. I have a license to carry, so if I had to evacuate by some other means, whether it be a neighbor's vehicle or if somebody had to come in and get us, I would have been okay. But I can definitely respect why Representative Phelan is bringing this bill, because you get a lot of questions around that time. Alice and I field questions from 1.2 million concealed handgun licensees across the state. I represent over 500,000 members. I'm their customer service in state, and Alice is with her 40,000 members. When something of the enormity of Harvey happens, we inevitably get questions from our members who want to follow the law when they're trying to get out where it's unsafe and to a safe place with their lawfully owned firearms. And if this bill can bring them some clarity, I think that would be extremely important, because we know we're gonna have more storms. We know we're gonna have more disasters. We have more clarity. I think that would be a strong improvement to the law. So thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Mike? I've got a question. Have you heard anything anecdotal about when we cross into that area of when a storm event is over, and when we're looking at, this isn't a response to a storm that you're out there freelancing, if you will, for lack of a better word. Does that make sense? I mean, you mentioned Florida as a place that it's been in place since
Right.
2015?
Since 2015.
I mean, anecdotal or otherwise, have we had any issues I think, our Chairman Phelan was talking about, he didn't have any stories or evidence about people being arrested for this stuff. I mean, maybe they have, but what I'm asking is, have we had incidents where we have a law in place, and after the storm event, one could argue we're past the storm event, somebody is relying on that in order to do something else? Does that make sense?
I think all we would have to look at is Florida's example, and I have not heard of any instances where somebody who somebody was taking advantage of that law. I mean,
That's probably a better way to put it. You're smarter than I, Ms. Mike. You say the words
Hardly.
fast.
And I think in Chairman Phelan's bill, it also conditions these allowances regarding carrying a handgun without a license and possession at a shelter that allows possession. It conditions that on the person being eligible to possess the firearm under state or federal law. So if you're not eligible to have the gun in the first place, you would not benefit from this law. I can't predict what would happen, but I think with the week-long time period built into his bill and that condition, you're taking care of the people that are trying to be law-abiding, and you can't do much about the people that are going to loot. And I'd rather not have the firearms left behind for them to loot and commit war crimes with.
Well, yeah, I would disagree with you, because we can't predict some things. I don't mean that in a bad way, but we can look at where these things have been implemented and have an idea, these general characteristics apply, which would make it appealing or somewhat beneficial to have a law like this in place in order to have this, because the chairman said some clarity. So we can, just like we can predict something. I'm not talking about this. I'm just saying generally. That's not how we do it. So I would disagree with the prediction. But I think the point that you're trying to get at is that you haven't seen anything extraordinary one way or the other, is that right?
Not in a state of large population size with a lot of storms that has had the benefit of, 3 hurricane seasons to see how it would work and what would be taken advantage of or reviewed.
I got you. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Oh, wait, hold on. Ms. Michael, we got a question over here.
In regards
Ms.
to,
Kalani?
yes, thank you. In regards to Florida, I remember it was right after Harvey, they had Hurricane Irma, and the police chief had to warn the residents not to shoot their guns at the storm. Do you remember that?
I remember him warning them, yes.
Right, so we have got that type of heightened response to a storm, we want to bring guns into an emergency shelter, where you're also gonna have heightened emotions. Do you think that's a good idea?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I can't say I understand why the police chief issued, and I forget what city that was, issued such a warning. But certainly this legislation does not condone or encourage, I don't believe, people shooting at an approaching storm. I mean, that's disorderly conduct and deadly conduct probably cover the type of act we're talking about, and those are already illegal. This bill would do nothing to negate those laws or enforcement of them.
Oh my gosh, what a stupid question.
People with their guns in a disaster that were not acting appropriately, they have heightened emotions. And then you have a bunch of people in an emergency shelter that also have heightened emotions.
Oh my
You don't allow them to have guns inside this heightened emotion situation. Do you think that's a good idea?
This woman's an idiot.
I think the bill, I'm sorry, Chairman Navarro's representative, the bill does not force any shelters to allow firearms in there. We're leaving it to the controller of the property or the whoever is in charge of the shelter to decide whether it's appropriate based on the population where they're located. We're not trying to force anything. I think it's, another thing the bill would do is allow a shelter that wants to address people who are showing up with their personal belongings, which might include firearms. It would allow a shelter to make that decision to allow. We're not trying to force it. I've been trying to give the property controller the flexibility to address something that's going to happen. People are going to show up with their lawful possessions, which are going to include firearms.
So do you think that creates an undue burden for those people in disaster situation anyways?
Oh my gosh.
Whether or not they want to allow some people in with guns?
Chairman Navarro's representative, I don't think it's an undue burden if they can elect not to do it at all.
Are there any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
We've got Mr. Brad Hodges now. Mr. Hodges, good afternoon, and just so you'll know your name, any organization that you may belong to that you're testifying on behalf of the position on the bill.
Brad Hodges, testifying for myself, and it's 41177. So I'm wearing boilerplate first and get personal. That's okay.
Got you on the time limit. So.
Yeah, I'll read quick. So the boilerplate, 4HB 117, lawful unlicensed carry of handguns by individuals not otherwise prohibited by law, because it may bolster protection preserving the civil liberties of individuals affected by disaster declarations in general, and affected by mandatory evacuation orders in particular. That would be section 428185. We'll look that up. Whereas the state lines on a map are not applicable to hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, wildfire, etc. Therefore, bolstering the protection and preservation of civil right of the individual to lawfully possess and use firearms is consistent with the accepted political doctrine of peaceable journey, which is also consistent with the Texas State Constitutional Bill of Rights, every Article 1, Section 23, and the beneficial interest of public safety. Tornado Alley also includes Oklahoma, the same as Texas. And it just so happens that the people of Oklahoma just last week signed into law lawful carry of unlicensed carry 24/7, 365, with no disaster declaration required. It's also known as constitutional carry. The good people of Kentucky also signed into law constitutional carry last week. And Texas can do the same this session, and HB 177 is a good step in the right direction. So there's a little. Now, on a personal level, I would like to respond to your question, Mr. Navarro, regarding the, oh, sorry, my mistake. Mr. Navarro's freelancing, taking advantage of
So he can
the law, I guess.
mispronounce
So,
everybody else's
my
names.
view on that, my perspective on that is disaster is part of, every one of us is subject to disaster affecting the person. That is a natural part of life, eventually given enough time. And that is the whole point of concealed carry on one's person. You don't need it until you do, and then you really need it to save lives. That is why cops carry their guns, right? If disasters were predictable, right, then we would not ever need emergency response plans. That's what concealed carry is.
Are there any questions for Mr. Hines? Thank you for answering my questions. Appreciate you. The chair now calls TJ Grisham. And, Mr. Grisham, I know that you were both in Texas, but please give us your name, the organization that you may be testifying on behalf of, and your position on the bill.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Navarez. Also, thank you, Representative Phelan, for bringing this bill. I find it sort of odd that we even need a bill like this, that it's going to take a state of emergency for the state to recognize my natural right to self-defense. First of all, I support the bill. My name is TJ Grisham. I'm here on behalf of Open Carry Texas and myself as well in support of this bill. I do have one issue related to the bill that I've already spoken with Representative Phelan's staff. He is, and that's the 168-hour or seven-day rule. We looked at Harvey, and that disaster lasted more than 7 days. And so what this bill would do if it keeps this way is it would rely on the governor to have to constantly extend the state of disaster. So I would just recommend that language just be changed to allow this to go on until the state of disaster is just lifted. I mean, let's forget about having to worry about extensions in 1 week, because what if it's 10 days?
Well, I don't mean to interrupt you right there, but I guess that was my point, is at some point there's some sort of pronounced barrier as to what we're doing going forward, and that's probably it, is the declaration of the disaster being in effect or not. Does that make sense?
Exactly. And so I think it would just be better and less confusing if it just said until the disaster is, order is lifted, instead of expecting the governor to have to constantly extend this disaster. That's our only issue with the bill. We still support it as written, but again, if, like 37 other states, we weren't required to have a license to carry, we wouldn't need this bill at all, because the state would recognize our right to defend ourselves 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in 100% of Texas territory. And we wouldn't have to, that would alleviate all confusion about whether or not I need a license, because I wouldn't need one.
I'll just stop you right there so we can stay on the bill, because
I'm talking this bill.
Well, no, but I recognize a shameless plug for another bill, which is okay.
I haven't mentioned any other bills. I'm talking about our rights that this bill is trying to recognize during a limited portion of our lives. So this is saying that I only have this right if the state says, or if some hurricane is invited into our state, my rights only exist during those disaster times, when I say that they exist at all times. So that's, I'm not going to repeat what Tara and Alice have already said, as well as the gentleman just before me. So I'll just leave it at that unless you've got any questions. But I will say that we did have members that were affected, especially by the emergency location places. They were being disarmed. That's got to get fixed, because if people are pushed into a disaster location or an emergency shelter, they should not be disarmed. License holders are and gunners are very law-abiding citizens. We know what we're doing. We're not a threat to anybody.
Thank you, Mr. Grisham. Is there any testimony Are there any questions for Mr. Grisham while he's up there?
All right.
Mr. Grisham, thank you.
Thank you very much.
See you soon. Chair, now, Mr. Walter West. West, will you please identify yourself again and any organization that you may belong to that you're testifying on their behalf and your position on the bill, please?
Yes, my name is Walter West, veteran, sort of first class retired. I am a SREC member of the Republican Party of Texas. This specifically hits one of our platform points on constitutional period, so I look at it as constitutional period of emergency. As well as I represent the American Legion and some of the soldiers I used to serve with, as well as some of the police officers I used to serve with. During Hurricane Harvey, and I am for the bill. Specifically during Hurricane Harvey, my district in the area that I was spread out from was from Beaumont all the way down to Woodsboro, Texas. Woodsboro, Port Aransas and all that, as y'all know, was first to receive it. During a time period, law enforcement and I believe the state security is one of the assets, as well as I'm not a licensed. I've fought for a constitution, non-combat zones. I have been shot as a police officer in the state of Texas back in the 90s. The only place I have been shot is in the state of Texas. I do not believe that I should have to ask for a right to defend myself. I teach firearms training to police officers, to law enforcement. Therefore, during Hurricane Harvey, I was requested several different times, can you come help us out at our shelter, at our center? We disarmed several people that came out, so they had the ability to do that. One of my other positions I have is a fire captain in Harris County on the rescue group. We did several things back then. I can tell you as a soldier, I've been into New Orleans, post Hurricane Katrina, and saw the need for something like this. Because the criminals already had this. We were having to handle criminals with firearms. The fact that we plucked people off the roofs of airboats with an airboat, the fact that we utilize helicopters, these are the last things they take. Whenever they go into a shelter, such as the Red Cross shelter, whether it be at a church, whether it be at a local civic center or whatnot, those places do have the ability to monitor who comes in and out. Specifically, law enforcement was stretched. Representative Lane can tell you about being a former police officer himself. Can tell you that law enforcement is not there during an emergency. They are around, but they are not specifically there. There are several times when we were between Cleveland, Texas, to all into Harris County, where we could not get there by vehicle, so we had to use both. We're picking people up from their front porches, from the streets walking, and that's one of the items that very good, because that was the only source of protection. You guys did discuss the ability for after the aftermath, where people can take advantage of it. The criminals always have to have their firearms at all times. That's the long and short.
Mr. West, thank you. I thank you for your service. Are there any questions?
So you mentioned that you're not a license holder, but it sounds like you're qualified. How difficult would it be to get a license?
Going down, taking the class. I'm actually a proponent for constitutional carry, so I just don't think I need to ask permission for the government to defend myself. Whenever police officers request my assistance to help defend them.
Right, so it seems like it would be a pretty easy thing just to get the license and have the knowledge and the background and the credentials. I get it, it's kind of against your philosophy.
I just don't want to go back to the police academy.
You would have to go to the police academy to get the license.
Well, to carry the way I would do it. So I have a ranch, and we work on ranches, and we have residential agreements for those ranches, so we stay within the confines of the law. But we're getting off into the constitutional period, I'm going to do that.
So if you had a license, then this change to the law wouldn't be necessary? Is that what I'm getting from?
That's correct.
Well, I've got a question for you. You said something about, I don't know why I was under the impression that you had an active TCLOS license, that's your license to carry. But you mentioned something about going back to police academy. Am I wrong about that?
Oh, I do not have a TCLOS.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. When I went away, when I was deployed after 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security recreated itself. So I actually lost my private investigator's license.
I got you.
My TCLOS at the time, TCLOS, and
Any other questions for?
What's your district?
What's that, sir?
What district are you?
Senate District 4.
Oh, I'm right by us. I was 11 for 8 years.
Well, I believe still, but we're.
Well, I live at 11 now, yeah, but I was SRC for 11.
Okay.
Any other questions? No, thank you very much. At this time, there being nobody else registered to testify, is there anybody else that wishes to testify on for or against this bill? Seeing nobody and hearing nobody, the chair calls up Chairman Freeman to close on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a text about federal declaration. The way it works is a mayor or a county judge has to first declare it local, just ask for a declaration, and then kicks in the federal. It's actually important because, and typically a local or a local declaration may last, or state may last for months, and that's because you want to, if you rescind that, then the federal disaster will be rescinded, and certain federal aid stops. So there's a reason why the government continues to restate, whether it be DSNAP or some other program. So, they're not doing this. I reject their, this is about, right now, the way this bill is written, it's about mandatory evacuations. The government is telling you to leave your home. All right, now they're going to suspend your Second Amendment rights, is the way I see it. They tell you to leave, oh, now you can't bring your gun, or you're committing a crime. And like I said, if they show up at a school with that gun, they could walk in the door, and a law enforcement officer could charge them with a state jail felony. Law guidance says, they walk into a church, it can be a Class A misdemeanor. And I think that's harsh for someone who just left their home with 3 or 4 feet of water in it, probably all their worldly possessions have ruined. Quite frankly, they want some normalcy in their life, and the last thing they need is a state jail felony, being charged with state jail felony, or even worrying about the state jail felony. I'll take any questions, but I just wanted to respond to some of the testimony that was brought before me.
Thank you, Chairman. Are there any questions for Chairman Freeman? Chairman Paul, please.
Chairman Freeman, thanks for bringing this here. It looks like a great bill, so I'm sorry I missed your testimony on the opening of your bill, but so would this be in an evacuation zone, and then the shelters would be outside that zone? Both of those would be covered, so like if I go back in and check my property, there's still an evacuation zone, but they let you back in to check your property, you could carry it there as well?
Correct.
All right.
That's my
So
understanding.
both locations, you would be able to do this?
That's my understanding about, yes, sir.
Okay, great.
Clarify that as far as you probably going to a county that does not have
Yeah, like, so if you say evacuation zone, and one would be the actual zone, like, near me, Galveston Island, you would say, hey, Galveston Island, shut off, everybody evacuates, you can't get back in.
Sure, so in Harvey, I can tell you, it was probably well over 40 counties that had declaration.
Okay, yeah,
Most of my individuals who were evacuated, that did not have transportation, got into a vehicle that they did not have possession or control over, that's the traveler exemption. So if you have your own car, you're exempted from this anyway. You get in a stranger's car or a neighbor's car, you're not exempted. Most of those individuals, I would say, ended up in the disaster area anyway.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to clarify. So just so it's a declared disaster county, you could have, this would work.
100%. The question is, you're asking me, and I can.
Don't have to be an evacuation zone.
Whether or not it would, if you were evacuated to Travis County, would it apply there? That's a valid question. I'll have to go back to you on that.
Yeah, because in Darren Harvey, as we both know, that was going on, people were going to the house or whatever, right? But as you stated, people were just grabbing their worldly possessions from your district and mine and leaving. And if you couldn't keep your gun with you, what would you do? Let it get flooded? And obviously the criminal would be stealing it in too. So.
Well, we didn't have as much looting after Harvey because there was nothing to loot. It all floated away. But after Ike and Reed, I can tell you that was a huge issue in Southeast Texas, looting was. And it's insult to injury. You've been victimized once, you've been victimized twice.
I can see you don't want to get victimized in the shelter. I can see you don't want to get victimized in the shelter.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair Paul. Any other questions for Chairman Freeman? Ms. Goodman?
Okay, so it sounds like this really is only an issue for people who don't have a license to carry or a concealed handgun license.
Or if you've lost it, let's say you walk out of your home in the middle of the night and you didn't grab your wallet, you could also be charged for not having your license on you if you were stopped. This covers that as well.
Okay, so they wouldn't look in a computer and say, I mean, in an emergency situation, you really think that law enforcement's gonna crack down on you didn't
Oh, yeah.
have your wallet in an emergency situation anyway?
Well,
Yes, they do.
That you
So-
have one.
I mean, isn't that in a computer system somewhere, whether you got a, kind of like a driver's license?
Well, I can tell you about 3 a.m. on August 31st, when a few thousand people were walking down the street in Port Arthur trying to find a shelter, and law enforcement were going to tell them where to go. If they saw a firearm, they're probably not gonna run back to the office and turn on the computer and see if that person had a PC. This would exempt them from worrying about that.
Okay. I guess I'm just trying to
She's
wrap
a
my head around how many people this really affects. So I've got a,
Good
do you have
golly.
any idea how many are licensed versus not licensed and how many?
I can get you that. There are several, I believe, previous witness said there's 500,000 license holders in Texas.
So it wouldn't
That's
affect that.
28.5 million that aren't licensed, assuming that some of those have firearms.
1.2.
Handguns.
So there's far more people who are unlicensed than licensed.
So yes, let's assume that would be the case. Absolutely. My wife is not licensed. She's fine with guns, but she doesn't want to go through classes. But she would be committing a crime if I gave her a firearm to protect herself during an evacuation.
So
such as this.
I guess someone who's not licensed, they may know how to take care, may know safe procedures with the gun, they just haven't gone through the process of getting a license for carrying a gun. I'm not a gun owner, so I'm sorry.
What an idiot. But yes, she's anti-gun. She's not a gun owner.
Mr. West will tell you that former law enforcement, former military, didn't have a license, he could, well qualified to operate a firearm. I wouldn't pull one on him, but, I think he's well qualified, but he just chose not to do it, and I think there's plenty of instances where they chose not to do it, or perhaps they had one and expired, and they just, I'm not going through the class again, and taking the test again, and shooting for proficiency again. I've never been asked for it, I never take it out of my house, never take it out of my car. So if you, again, if it's in your car, you're covered, If you're evacuating your car, this bill doesn't apply, there's a travel exception already in the law. If I get my neighbor's car and evacuate, and have my gun with me, and I'm not licensed, or I lost my license, then I can be charged.
Okay, and along a different line, I'm just curious how it works in a shelter. So if somebody comes in with a gun in a shelter and they say we aren't allowing guns here, then what happens?
They can leave the shelter.
And it doesn't matter whether you're a license holder or not.
Correct.
Okay, and if they are allowing guns in?
That is entirely, I'm telling you, that's already happening. I can tell you, there are churches who allow, and at least in my district, there are churches who allow owners of handguns into their church. And there was an instance, where HPD, when they were operating or doing security at George Brown Convention Center, the largest evacuee spot in probably in Harris County. They had a safe room where they, as people came in, whether you had a license or not, they took your gun and they locked it up. And when you wanted to leave, they gave it back to you, whether you had a license or not. They could have arrested you in that license if they wanted to, because they're unlawful carrying. But like I said earlier in my testimony, they were very cooperative, very understanding, and didn't want to put someone through that undue burden. So they acted, I thought, very responsibly and they, again, with medication, they do the same thing with medication. You're not just gonna walk in with, prescription drugs and let them line around for children to find. So they do it for all kinds of items. And valuables too. If you have valuables that you want checked in, that you don't wanna be worried living next to a cot in a huge open room with 600 other of your new best friends, then they will take that as well. Each shelter is free to do what they want to do. And this bill makes certain that whoever's operating it gets to decide this law or not.
Any other questions for Chairman Peter? There being none,
I appreciate it. I would love your favorable consideration as time comes.